Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into the fascinating, real-life chronology of the world's most famous playwright. We hear his name literally all the time, right? But today, we're looking closely at the actual historical records, not just the myths. We're going to separate the man from the enduring legend and explore the whole biography of William Shakespeare.
Here is our roadmap for today. First, The Boy from Stratford. 2. Marriage and the Lost Years. 3. London and the Plague. 4. Mastering the Stage. 5. Return to Stratford. And finally, 6. Legacy and Authorship. Let's get right into it. Section 1. The Boy from Stratford. A Provincial Beginning.
To anchor our journey, let's look at a quick timeline. We start with his birth in Stratford in 1564, followed by his marriage to Anne Hathaway in 1582. Then, he's established in London by 1592, and finally, his death back in Stratford in 1616. It's an incredible progression from a Glover's son to an absolute literary immortal.
Now, you might be wondering about that 20%. Well, in Elizabethan England, infant mortality was roughly 20%. Disease was rampant, sanitation was, well, poor, to say the least. Honestly, as author Bill Bryson points out, just surviving his first year in 1564 was an incredible achievement for William. In fact, his parents had actually lost their first 2 daughters in infancy before he came along and became the eldest surviving child.
So, he definitely wasn't born into poverty. Quite the opposite, actually. His mother, Mary Arden, came from a really prosperous farming family, and his father, John, was a prominent, affluent businessman, a glove maker, a tanner, and a wool dealer. John even rose up to become the town bailiff, which is basically the equivalent of a modern-day mayor. Because of this high standing, William likely attended the local Edward VI Grammar School, where he got an intense classical education, memorizing and acting out Latin plays.
Section 2. Marriage and Lost Years. The Missing Records.
Things move fast for young William. At just 18 years old, in 1582, he married Anne Hathaway. Now, she was 26 and already pregnant with their first child, Susanna, who arrived in 1583. Just 2 years later, in 1585, they welcomed twins, Hamlet and Judith. Think about that for a second. By age 21, Shakespeare had a wife and 3 kids to support. It really grounds him, doesn't it? He was a real human being facing heavy, real-world pressures, not just some distant literary figure.
Okay, I want you to play historical detective with me for a minute here. Because for a span of 7 years, following the birth of his twins in 1585 until he pops up in London in 1592, we have absolutely no official records of his life. None. What happened during these lost years? We don't know how he earned a living, when exactly he left Stratford, or how he somehow broke into the super-competitive London theater scene.
Well, you know how it is. Nature hates a vacuum, and so does history. So legends just rushed in to fill the gap. People love these wild stories, like the tale that he had to flee Stratford after poaching deer from the estate of Sir Thomas Lucy, or the classic story that he got his start in London literally by holding the horses of theater patrons outside the playhouses. But look, we have to acknowledge what we don't know. There is zero historical, documentary evidence to support these myths. They are purely the creation of tradition.
Section 3. London and the Plague. Surviving the Outbreaks.
By 1592, he's finally on the map as an established London writer. But imagine trying to write a masterpiece while a deadly disease ravages your city. In 1593, a massive outbreak of the bubonic plague forced the London theaters to close entirely. So, he pivoted. He turned to writing poetry. And this quote from his 1593 poem, Venus and Adonis, shows how the absolute terror of the plague was constantly on his mind. He writes about a love so powerful it could drive infection from the dangerous year.
Section 4. Mastering the Stage. Building a Legacy.
Fortunately, the plague eventually subsided. Shakespeare returned to a booming theatrical career, collaborating closely with his company, the Lord Chamberlain's Men, later known as the King's Men. And his output? It was insane. 37 plays and 154 sonnets. This staggering number proves just how relentless and dedicated he was to his craft during his time in London. He was acting, he was a business partner, and he was churning out epics, comedies, and tragedies at an absolutely astonishing rate. What's also amazing is how he adapted. Take the Blackfriars Theater. This was a former Dominican monastery that got transformed into an exclusive candlelit indoor playhouse for his company. Unlike the massive open-air Globe Theater, Blackfriars allowed for winter performances and had really subtle acoustics, so Shakespeare actually wrote some of his late plays, like The Two Noble Kinsmen, specifically to take advantage of this intimate indoor staging.
Section 5. Return to Stratford, Wealth and Tragedy.
Eventually, that bustling London life gave way to a quiet retirement back in his hometown. His massive theatrical success allowed him to return to Stratford as a very wealthy landowner. In 1597, he bought New Place, the second largest house in town, funded by his acting, manuscript sales, and his valuable Globe Theatre shares. But it wasn't all a victory lap. The year before buying the house, his only son, 11-year-old Hamlet, tragically died. His family line eventually ended completely in 1670, leaving him with no direct descendants today. Shakespeare himself passed away on April 23, 1616.
He was buried in Holy Trinity Church in Stratford. Check out this inscription on his tombstone, which is widely believed to have been written by Shakespeare himself. "Blessed be the man that spares these stones, and cursed be he that moves my bones." It's remarkably dark, but honestly, it has this slightly humorous, playful touch designed to keep grave robbers at bay. It's just a deeply personal glimpse into his final days.
And our final section, number 6, Legacy and Authorship, the Enduring Debates.
Here is a wild fact about his legacy. It almost didn't happen. When he died, 18 of his plays remained completely unpublished. If it weren't for 2 of his fellow actors, John Hemming and Henry Condell, who published the first folio in 1623, 7 years after his death, half of his incredible plays might have been lost to history entirely. They quite literally saved his legacy, and all for a selling price of just £1.
Of course, we have to talk about the famous authorship question. We're just impartially reporting the debate here. On one side, you have anti-Stratfordians. They argue that a man with a humble provincial background couldn't possibly possess the vast knowledge of court life and law found in the plays. They point to alternative candidates like Edward de Vere, Francis Bacon, or Christopher Marlowe. But then on the other side, you have the Stratfordians, which is the broad academic consensus. They maintain that the historical evidence, contemporary references, and that first folio strongly, solidly support the man from Stratford as the true and sole author.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I'll leave you with a provocative thought. Because of the missing records, the lost years, and the simple fact that he lived over 400 years ago, there will always be things we just don't know about William Shakespeare. But perhaps that scarcity of historical record is exactly what gives his work such enduring power. By not knowing every single mundane detail of his daily life, we're less likely to tie his plays to specific events, which allows us to see our own reflections, our own tragedies, and our own comedies in his timeless characters. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the life of the Bard.